So if you've been following this channel, you would have noticed a lot of videos on Rome, Notion, productivity, and note-taking. And the meta theme that you may have noticed in a lot of my videos is being consistent with doing things. I have been a follower of the James Clear school of thought and the 1% improvement philosophy, which says that if you improve by 1% every day, over a period of a year, you would have increased your output 36x times what you were before. And I feel that this is a great way to evaluate long-term opportunities and build systems and things around you that pay off in the long term, which is why I have been long on note-taking, because I feel that over a period of time, as your notes compound, they will eventually give you some amount of output, which may result in a creative essay, which may result in a book, an idea, or any kind of innovation. And that's why I feel that note-taking is one big component. The other big component that I want to talk about in this video is augmenting long-term memory. What do I mean by that? Well, I read this article by Michael Nielsen. It's called Augmenting Long-Term Memory. And Michael Nielsen talks about this app Anki that he uses every now and then, or in fact on a daily basis. And he uses that app to basically review his flashcards. So let's say that he wants to write an article or a long form essay on deep learning or reinforcement learning. So what Michael Nielsen would do is read a bunch of papers, create Anki questions in the app, and then review them on a constant basis. And over a period of time, not only is he able to digest more and more papers, his ability to digest and absorb information from complex, technical, very hard to read papers just grows exponentially. And that's what the entire idea of building and investing in your long-term memory is. And one of the excerpts, before I delve deep into the entire article, that really struck me from this essay was that oftentimes people think that it's the complex and complicated topics that are the troublemakers in understanding something. But Michael Nielsen says that if you focus on the basics, and you just focus on the basics, the complex things will take care of themselves. Because in his experience of teaching quantum computing to people, he has noticed that a lot of the times, people's ability to not understand technical subjects is not related to how hard the technical subject actually is. It boils down to actually not remembering the basics. And that kind of insight, after having studied CS at Berkeley for 3 years, I felt that that insight was pretty useful, because had I known that much prior to or during my experience at Berkeley, I may have focused more on the basics and may have tried not to really stress about the complex topics. And that's why I feel that this essay is a fundamental, seminal essay if you want to invest in your long-term memory, and if you want to invest in this whole idea of knowledge should compound and build over a period of time. So this video is going to be a bit raw. I'm just going to go through the article, read a few excerpts out, but I'll link all the timestamps in the description below, so you can feel free to jump around whichever excerpt makes the most amount of sense to you. But really, the idea is to show you how I use Anki, which excerpts actually inspired me to use Anki, and what this whole long-term memory system is all about. So I guess I've covered what the long-term memory system is all about by giving you a quick spiel on why you should consider investing in your long-term memory, why knowledge should compound over a period of time, and how we can actually do that. Now let's go through the article, in which I'll show you a bunch of excerpts that I highlighted. So let's get right to it. So this is really the essay that I have over here. If you go through the essay, you will see a bunch of references and academic papers from people who have done solid research on memory and how memory works. And that is what lends this essay a lot of credence and a lot of credibility for you to actually learn how memory works and how you can make memory a choice and not just leave it to chance. That's really the whole shtick of the essay. So the first highlight that I have is that a memex is a device in which an individual stores all his books, records, and communications, and which is mechanized so that it may be consulted with exceeding speed and flexibility. It is an enlarged, intimate supplement to his memory, which is why if you've watched my Notion or Rome videos, I have been investing in building a memex for myself. Think of it like a personal Google, which is easily searchable, from which you can easily retrieve complex and important information, and from which you can derive value and meaning on the fly. So you can load it with as much information and as much knowledge as possible, but at the same time, it also sustains and retains its retrievability or its searchability. And that is what makes it extremely valuable, because let's say if you're reading a book, 5 years down the line, you want to remember or try to recall what was a particular concept that was talked about in that book, right? Now, if your notes, first of all, do not compound over a period of time, you won't be able to do that. And second of all, if they do, you want to have a note-taking system which allows you to find that book, allows you to search that concept that you were looking for in the first place, which is where all these tools come in. But really, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to show you how you can augment long-term memory. So that was the first basic highlight that I thought was extremely valuable. Moving on to the second one, two things really struck me, which are the rules of thumb for memorizing and why investing in long-term memory makes sense. So Michael Nielsen writes that first, if memorizing a fact seems worth 10 minutes of my time in the future, then I do it. I first saw an analysis along these lines in Gwen Brandwen's review of Spaced Repetition. His numbers are slightly more optimistic than mine. He arrives at a 5-minute rule of thumb rather than 10 minutes. What he's really saying over here is that if you take the time to make Anki cards and review them on a day-to-day basis, over a period of time, you would have actually invested 10 minutes per card. The time scale that we're looking at is 10 years or 20 years. And the basic question, the basic premise that he's putting forward is that after doing a bunch of math, if you feel that a fact or an idea or something is worth 10 minutes of your time over a 20-year time period, then you should probably put it in Anki and solidify it in your brain by using Anki and reviewing it on a day-to-day basis. And that is really the whole idea of why going ahead with building this memory, long-term memory system is extremely useful. The second reason why he says investing in this long-term memory is useful is because he says, second and superseding the first, if a fact seems striking, then into Anki it goes, regardless of whether it seems worth 10 minutes of my time or not. The reason for this exception is that many of the most important things we know are things we're not sure are going to be important, but which our intuitions tell us matter. This doesn't mean we should memorize everything, but it's worth cultivating taste in what to memorize. Again, this was a super nice excerpt to convince me to step into this whole long-term memory game. So this essay is again pretty long, but in this particular excerpt, he talks about one of his experiences reading an AlphaGo paper. He says, 1, I was trying to simply identify the most important ideas in the paper. What were the names of the key techniques I'd need to learn about? Second, there was a kind of hoovering process, looking for basic facts that I could understand easily and that would obviously benefit me. Things like basic terminology, the rules of Go, and so on. So over here, he's saying that if you want to read, let's say, technical papers or something that is complex and hard to digest in the first go, you want to read like he was doing, and you want to create Anki questions on the fly. And that may slow down your process in the first few attempts of reading that piece, but over a period of time, you would notice that even though the piece itself is complex, just by the fact of putting your questions and encoding memory using Anki and reviewing your cards on a day-to-day basis, you have actually made it immensely easier for yourself to read that paper again, absorb more information, and read that paper again and absorb even more information. And over a period of time, this compounds over itself. You iterate, you continue to develop that muscle, and then it becomes, on one fine day, it just becomes super easy for you to not only read just that paper, but 5 other papers around you. And that's what the idea that Michael Nielsen is talking about over here. In this particular excerpt, he says that how conventional note-taking differs from Ankifying stuff. And that's a verb that he uses throughout the essay. I really like it. How can you Ankify stuff? And I hope one day it just becomes a verb like Google is. So he says, by contrast, had I used my conventional note-taking in my original reading of the AlphaGo paper, my understanding would have rapidly evaporated, and it would have taken longer to read the later papers. And so using Anki in this way gives confidence you will retain understanding over the long term. This confidence in turn makes the initial act of understanding more pleasurable, since you believe you're learning something for the long haul, not something you'll forget in a day or a week. And again, this just aligns with the entire idea of investing in your future self. And that's why I would just highly recommend Anki-fying stuff, buying the Anki app on your phone, or using the web or the desktop version and just reviewing flashcards on a day-to-day basis. So again, these are all the excerpts that you can go through, which I'll obviously link down in a Notion doc below. So you can just go through these excerpts. I think they're super useful. I have like many notes and many highlights from this one essay, but I'm just going to read the best ones. So I would say the next extremely valuable highlight that I have over here is this. This particular excerpt talks about how you create Anki questions. And if you've watched one of my previous videos on making evergreen notes using Roam, creating Anki questions is a lot similar to making evergreen notes. So over here in this particular excerpt, Michael Neitzel gives you the download of how memory works, how you should use Anki, and what kinds of questions you should put into Anki. So he says, break things up into atomic facts. Build rich hierarchies of interconnections and integrative questions. Don't put in orphan questions. Patterns for how to engage with reading material. Patterns and anti-patterns for question types. Patterns for the kinds of things you'd like to memorize. Anki skills concretely instantiate your theory of how you understand. Developing those skills will help you understand better. It's too strong to say that to be a virtuoso Anki user is to be a virtuoso in understanding, but there is some truth to it. This excerpt, I would say, is one of the most valuable for me and which just totally sold me on this whole long-term memory thing. So what Anki really does is that it randomizes all your cards and gets you to review all your cards every day in a completely random order. So on one hand, you may be reading about something that's totally not related to a technical field which you're trying to master for some paper that you're writing. And just having this crisscross random access to your memory just solidifies your nodes in the brain to such a different extent that it's absolutely useful in the long run. And that's another reason why I have been using Anki for all this while. So yeah, I guess that is pretty much what I have over here. I highly recommend reading this article. It's a super nice, super useful article on how you can develop memory and invest in your future self. But I'll link everything down in the description below, so feel free to jump to it. Now let's get right to how I use Anki and what are the kinds of questions that I have encoded. So I have the Anki phone version over here. As you can see, Anki is one of my top 4 apps, the others being obviously Roam and Notion. So I was actually learning about p-value today. And I know that p-values are relatively very basic things, but again, the entire idea of doing Anki and writing down basic questions is so that you can actually make memory a choice and just seamlessly glide over the complex stuff without having to worry about the basics in the future. So me learning about p-values, especially after I have taken a few statistics courses at Berkeley, is really only to solidify something that is inherently basic and something that we should know if at all we want to learn more complex things in the future. So yeah, p-value is the probability of obtaining results at least as extreme as the observed results of a statistical hypothesis test. So I'm just gonna go ahead with that one. So now I was also learning about bundling, and I wrote a few notes on bundling also, which I'll also link down in the description. And I was just using Anki to actually memorize technical stuff that is associated with this entire concept of bundling. So here is another one question, and you can just encode pictures into Anki also. And the moment I open this, I see that, oh, this is something that I did review, and this is something that I know relatively well. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say, let's call it easy. So when I say easy, it will remind me in the next 4 days to review this card. But if I say good or not easy or I fail, then it will remind me in a sooner interval. So how would you calculate the wholesale price without removing the product from the bundle? Let's see, this is something that, as a matter of fact, I don't remember. So I'm just gonna say again, and it will remind me sooner rather than later. And now what it's doing is it is reversing the Anki card. So it's not showing me the question first. it's showing me the answer. And the moment it does that, it allows me to encode memory in a different way. And that is again something that Michael Nielsen talks about in his essay, because he says that you can talk about the same thing in two different ways, but talking about the same thing in two different ways is incredibly useful, because doing that encodes the memory in your brain in two different ways. And that is something that's super valuable in the long term. So now that I have read this, I'm just gonna go tap, and yes, I obviously know the question and I know that this is the answer to that question. I'm gonna say that this was good this time, not easy, just for its own sake. I was also learning about companies. So how do Microsoft and Sony differ in gaming? Well, I know that Sony is going for more of the traditional gaming sector, whereas Microsoft is eventually going for a subscription gaming center with its whole Xbox suite. So that's exactly what the answer is. So I'm just gonna go easy and it will remind me in 13 days. So yeah, this was pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you really enjoyed it. And I hope that you also start investing in your long-term memory, because that's something that I find incredibly useful. And I hope that this video somewhat convinced you to do that. So thanks for watching.